Good evening, everybody. This is the August 1st Zoning Board of Appeals hearing. My name is Jim Wendt. I'm the chairman. I will let the other folks present say their names for the recorded record.
Brian Cotton.
Ben Magny, member.
Dominic Panitia, member.
There's one matter on our public hearing tonight. I will read the notice of public hearing, 39 Richards Drive, variance application of flood damage control standards in accordance with zoning section 6.6.3D. Application of property owner Glenn Blanchette to allow a new single-family residence with basement floor elevation of 406.5 above mean sea level in lieu of being above base flood elevation of 410 above mean sea level for property in a 100-year floodplain. Before I open up that hearing well, I will, never mind, I will say that we'll open file 1392 39 Richards Drive. The applicant or the representative needs to come on down and identify themselves and explain to us what this application is all about.
Good evening. Name's Harry Rocheville. Last name R-O-C-H-E, V as in Victor, I-L-L-E. I'm representing Glenn Blanchette. Like I said, we're here to talk about 39 Richards Drive.
Okay. I'm sorry, Mr. Rocheville. Before you do that, is the applicant here this evening?
Yes. He's right here.
Can you, Mr. Blanchette, I just want you to understand there's 4 of us sitting this evening. A variance of the zoning regulations requires an affirmative vote of 4 people. Normally there would be 5 voting members. So if any one of us is going to vote in the negative tonight, that would be a denial of your application. We are ready to move forward tonight if you are, but you have the option of continuing this matter till we have a full 5-member board, in which case it may or may not, depending on the outcome, increase your chances for success. You need a unanimous yes from the 4 of us this evening. If anyone votes no, it would result in a denial because you need 4 affirmative votes for an approval.
I would prefer to move forward, please.
Okay. Fair enough.
That's it?
That's it. Mr. Rocheville.
Okay. So like I was saying, we're here to talk about 39 Richards Drive. It's a as-built site. As you can see here, it's an existing single-family home, 2-story residence constructed in the Farmel River floodplain. Base flood elevation for this area is at 410 feet above mean sea level. The basement slab is at 406.5 as built today. The base flood elevation is referenced from the latest FEMA firm maps and flood insurance study. And I should note that the finished floors of the residence are both above the base flood elevation. The garage slab is at 411.5 feet, and the finished first floor is at 415.5 feet. As you can see on the screen, we are proposing some changes to be made to the residence and the property itself to comply with section 6.6 of the zoning regulations titled Flood Damage Control. These changes are also outlined in a narrative that was submitted to the Commission dated July 24th, 2017. We're proposing to provide compensatory storage in the event of a flood event that will offset any additional volume displaced by the construction of the residence and any site work made. We looked at the pre-existing survey before any site work was done at this parcel, and we looked at the as-built survey that we conducted to determine the net amount of earth that was filled below the base flood elevation of 410 feet. Calculations have also been provided, and there was a net of 6,845 cubic feet of fill added to the site that related to the site work and the residence construction. We plan to offset this volume by regrading the sides and the backyard of the house, where we could find enough space below the base flood elevation to make these changes. The regrading will remove approximately 6,950 cubic feet from the site, which is more than enough to compensate the storage brought in. Also, the land will be graded in such a way that there will be an unrestricted hydraulic connection back to the floodplain and wetlands at the south of the property, just to the west of the conservation wall that the Inlands and Wetlands Commission wanted us to construct previously. It should be noted that the site work, it should be noted that site work was approved by the Inland and Wetlands Commission at a hearing last week as well, as all the site work was within the wall that they previously approved. Also at this site, to mitigate any damage caused by a flood event, flood vents were installed on the house to relieve any hydrostatic force caused by a flood event. Myself and Scott coordinated with FEMA, Scott the town engineer, coordinated with FEMA and came up that we would need 3 16 by 16 smart vents to be installed at most 1 feet above the exterior grade and on 2 separate walls. I was out at the site yesterday and all 3 flood vents have been installed to confirm with that regulation.
Let's have a question before you proceed with it.
Sure.
They're all they're on the rear wall, correct? Is that jog
Correct.
in that rear wall enough to constitute that being a separate wall for the purpose of that statement you just made that the?
Well, I suppose, I believe the note says the location to be verified in field as there's doors and windows there.
Right.
And actually,
But they're
they
all
were spread out a little bit more.
right, but they're all on that same rear wall.
Right. All the regulations say is 2 separate walls. There's no separation distance requirements. It's, the way they explain it is as long as they're on 2 separate walls, there's no, as far as the rule saying, I think it's technical bulletin 1 provided by FEMA, that there's no clearance distances between them. And Smart Vent also didn't have any clearance distances between them.
Yeah, the distance doesn't concern me, it's just whether or not those are all considered to be on the same wall or not, is my question.
I would say they're not, but
Because
I
of
see
that,
what you're saying.
because of that offset in the.
Yeah. But as I was saying, they were installed yesterday and they didn't get put in those locations just based on the field conditions. One was put to the furthest left of the house, if you can see that top key plan.
Mhm.
So they were spread out a lot more. And I should note that they have to be below the base flood elevation.
Right.
Since they were so tall, they just kind of had to be where they were placed based on the conditions of the site. Okay, so back to the flood vents. It also should also be noted that the flood vents provide additional storage in the event of a flood because there will be unrestricted automatic entry and exit of flood waters into the basement, and that space will be used for additional storage so we can gain some of our compensatory storage back by having that volume help us out a little bit. And if there wasn't this basement space here, there would have to be some sort of slab on grade or foundation wall construction, and that volume wouldn't necessarily be able to be used, which would cause us to provide a lot more compensatory storage to offset that volume. And just based on the site conditions and the elevation of the wetlands at the rear of the site, which we'll need to provide that unrestricted hydraulic connection, it would create a pool in the backyard, and that connection wouldn't be able to be made. Also, as part of that section 6.6 of the regulations, we will be anchoring down any storage tanks to prevent the possibility of floating away in a flood event. There is a water pressure tank in the basement that will be anchored down using Hilti expansion anchors and some angles that'll be bolted together, and that'll resist any buoyant force. And also, there is a propane tank on the side of the property, it's located right here, that it's, I believe, I can't see it. I believe the bottom, yes, 407.3, so that is also below the base flood elevation, and that will also be anchored down to a concrete pad and anchor straps as well. All those calculations have been provided to the commission as well. Also on site, there was a furnace in the basement that was installed on the concrete slab at the 406.5 elevation. That has been since relocated, and a certification letter stamped by a licensed land surveyor in the state of Connecticut has been provided to state that that new bottom of elevation of the equipment is at 410.6 feet.
That's been done already?
Correct, that has been done. I believe that covers all the site conditions that we're going to be changing to conform to the regulations. I'd like to note that the Cultex system, the elevation at the top of there would remain the same. The septic system is also not being touched, as well as that is already outside of the base flood elevation. And in the event of an emergency, there will be access to the site as the driveway is above the base flood elevation and the whole finished floor is above the base flood elevation. So, and if anything were to happen at the house during a 100-year storm, there would be access to the house. Also to just any other damages, like I said, the tanks will be anchored down as well. There's our determination, based on these improved site conditions and the as-built residence, that there will not be any adverse effects on the surrounding community and floodplain, as we are taking care of the compensatory storage, not increasing the flood levels, and anything that could float will be anchored down. Compensatory storage area will eliminate any additional volume to the floodplain, and the flood vents will protect the foundation from any hydrostatic loading. And as I said before, it's our opinion that if the basement wasn't there, that additional volume wouldn't be able to be used for storage of floodwaters, and there would have to be more compensatory storage on site to make this property work. I also like to note that right here on the plan, this was the pre-existing base flood elevation, and just based on the small area that would be available, it would be, I believe it would be pretty tough to construct another house in this lot, in this neighborhood. Just to be able to have, especially since there's no sewer in the street, to be able to get a septic system in there, as that would probably have to be below a flood elevation as well, or in the floodplain as well, I should say. I'd like to open up to questions now.
I got a couple questions.
Sure.
Somewhere, I think it was in one of the narratives talked about why wasn't this determined before this was started, that this was in a flood zone and what that elevation needed to be? How did that come to pass?
Excuse me, this was before I was on the project. I think Glenn could explain this a little bit better.
Glenn Blanchett, homeowner of the property. So originally when the property was bought, I had bought the property for cash, and normally when you do a mortgage on a property, the mortgage company checks for the flood. So when I did it, when I purchased the property with the attorney, he did his due diligence, but it was for liens, taxes, anything like that. So the purchase of the property happened. Then when I went to pull the permit, we sent it through, we did our process, and unfortunately, every department that we sent it through, it was just an oversight that it was in a flood zone, and we started construction. And then when we got to the finished product for the C of O, that's when it was brought to everybody's attention, including mine, that it was in a floodplain. Everybody did their research, acknowledged the fact that it was, and came up with a solution. And that's where we are today in front of you with the remediation work to get it to conform within the flood zone.
Has the grading that's proposed on this plan, has that been done yet? I visited the site yesterday. I did see the flood vents. You said those were installed yesterday?
Yeah.
Has this grading taken place yet or not?
Yes, it has.
Because I saw the slabs that were poured for to anchor the tanks and so forth. So what, okay.
Yeah, the grading was done last Thursday and Friday, and the landscaping, raking, and seeding of.
Okay. So it looked like it was a pretty.
It was done.
Finished product. Okay. And because I had some questions about the elevation certificate from what I observed, because the elevation certificate doesn't indicate there's any flood openings. Obviously, at the time the elevation certificate was done, that was the case, so obviously that'll
Correct.
have to get
Correct.
redone.
Yep.
And the equipment, it says the mechanical equipment was lower than BFE, and that's subsequently, but it looked to me that it had been elevated off the floor. and
Correct,
that-
that's
So that
the-
was done after this elevation certificate was.
Right, that's the
was done.
furnace that was relocated, and we submitted the, a revised little certificate just saying that that was done.
I'm wondering if this variance is even required, and I don't know who's the best to answer that, since it's a walkout, since it's a slab, you know, you're not a basement technically from FEMA's perspective, since you're not below grade on all four sides, and that's gonna be an unfinished area downstairs, is it not?
It's not gonna be it's gonna be
Right,
unfinished, yes.
Right, and it's got the flood openings, so wouldn't it qualify as a, you know, fully enclosed area below the building's lowest floor rather than a, you know, technically a basement?
Correct,
zoning
yeah, as
code-
opposed to a
The
completely
zoning
enclosed.
code specifically calls out basements as being
Okay,
prohibited.
okay, so our
It's our code.
Our definition of a basement is different than.
Well, our floodplain regulations make it specifically say basements excluded, so I mean, it's going beyond what FEMA does.
Okay. Thank you. I don't quarrel with your conclusions that you arrive at, I was just had some questions about the status of that. Are you, Mr. Blanchard, are you going to be the owner and occupant of this house, or is this property for sale?
The property is for sale, and there's going to be new owners that are waiting for these issues to go through so that we can close on the property.
Have they, at this point, received a quote for flood insurance
Yes, the flood insurance has been issued on the home already.
based on
Based
a
on-
new elevation certificate being issued, or, okay? And is that, so that's, my main concern was, you know, variances of requirements tend to trigger exponential increases in that.
Yeah.
And my main concern was somebody who might not be aware of that situation would then be socked with an enormous flood insurance bill, but your prospective purchaser already has a quote.
Yeah,
that they-
and the proof of insurance has already been sent over to my attorney,
Okay.
so that we wanted full disclosure. You know, when we found out, we told them, they spoke to their insurance company, they got the quote, they accepted it. They already have insurance on the home because they moved all their personal possessions into the garage because of relocating. So they had to have all that done and with the attorneys. So.
Has a new elevation certificate been provided to the town yet, at this point?
No, just the, just a letter, I believe it was
Okay.
dated 2 days ago, but no, not a formal elevation certificate has been provided yet.
How close are you to CO, providing, without okay or without okay? How many more steps do you have to go for a CO?
The only final step that's required by me will be to have Scott, the engineering department, and Conrad from the wetlands department, just to do another field inspection to see that the site work and the remediation work that needed to be done has been completed. As far as the building department, they were out yesterday. Gunner from the building department came out yesterday, checked the flood vents, checked that the furnace was raised, checked that any plugs and switch, any of the electrical was all above the 410, and he did his inspection and approved everything. So the final inspection is to have Conrad and Scott, but it's pointless to have them out there till we get through this process, if it gets through, and then we'll move forward with them.
Okay.
Any other questions? One additional question, should we find a favor of this? Obviously, the flood vents kind of make it prohibitive to finish the basement, but would you have any objection to a condition that basement area remain unfinished?
I would prefer that that's not the case. I mean, the homeowners know about it. I know that they plan on, at some point, maybe coming into town and discussing it. You know, they have friends that have properties in other parts of the state where they're near the water and they're able to finish it, I guess, partially, I guess, if they would. But if it's something where, that's going to stop this from moving forward, then I would prefer that is not opposed on the final approval, but if it is, it's something I'll have to go back and deal with it with my clients, and hopefully we move forward. But if not, I mean, they have a walkout basement, and
Right.
they plan on using the yard, I'm assuming that they're gonna be using it, so I don't wanna limit the walkout to never being able to do something, but at the same time,
Would that-
I don't want the whole thing denied and not be able to use the house either, so.
Okay. I have a question for Mr. Greston. Would future finishing of that basement require additional action by us if, in the absence of such a condition?
You know, it may, and I think that's something that Scott, the town engineer, has said, that if they do other improvements, that they have to come back. I don't have an exact answer for you for
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
but it's possible that improvement would require to come back.
I mean, we have discussed it with them.
It would at least, it may not need to come necessarily back to you, and they at least would have to come back for a floodplain permit perhaps, but
Well, I see the narrative, somewhere in the narrative, or somebody's, that any future partitioning down there would also have to have
Yeah.
floodplain, so you don't have isolated cells within there that don't have.
Correct.
So the practicality of
Those
that being
are-
a tempered finished space, and their flood insurance isn't gonna cover anything that's in the basement.
It's not gonna cover it they won't be insured regardless of
Right.
whatever they finish, so. They're only insured from 415 and higher.
Right, okay.
So what's in the surrounding property? Is it just marshland, or is it kind of
Well,
wetlands?
there's
I know
residences
wetland.
to each side.
It's
And
what?
There's residences to each side, and then back here is, yeah, it's all marshland. This parcel actually extends quite a way back.
It's a 5 acre.
5 acre parcel.
Yeah, it's a 5 acre parcel with just over 3/4 of an acre of usable property. So, and there's a stone wall that the conservation required us to put in so that there would be a clear distinction or separation between the unusable area and the property area that we could use, so that at any time, future homeowners couldn't continue to move into the unusable area.
I believe that's been made an easement, correct? For the wetlands?
Yeah. And that had to be built and approved before we even got a permit to construct the home. So that's been there since the beginning.
so that's the lot, this is all the wetlands. These are all your house lots.
Yeah.
That's all wetland. That's a house.
There's no,
There's a house there.
I guess what I'm getting at, there's not a body of water right there.
Oh, there's a river.
There's a small river.
Yeah, the river is to the west. I believe it extends off of that little pond there and keeps traveling to
Oh, I
the
see.
There's another
southeast.
pond- Another
Yep.
pond here too.
But we're a good, I believe we're a good 500 feet from the floodway line,
There's the river.
so.
Goes in here, goes down.
Yeah, it crosses under Moose Hill Road, just to the right of the picture.
Right below the property.
Yeah.
I don't know why this won't come off.
It is very annoying when using GIS. I don't understand why either.
Here's your body of water.
Body of water.
If you type in the address next to it, it'll highlight that one and then we can see it.
I guess. I don't know what the address makes.
33?
33 or 45.
Oh,
There you
There you
go.
go.
Actually, this will let me get it off. The house is about here? Is it farther
A
back?
little
than
bit
the other?
further up, I'd say just about there.
Yeah,
So
where
it's
the
around
arrow is.
there.
Yeah,
Okay.
pretty much in line with the other ones.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Do either of you gentlemen wish to be heard?
Yes. Hi, my name is Mike Whiteman. I live at 45 Richards, right next to the property in question. A couple things I have. I really didn't understand what the new grading was done to achieve. I don't understand what that was for.
I can explain that. It is when the house itself, in the grading that took place there, in the event of a 100-year storm, would have displaced floodwater. It's like putting a brick in a bathtub. In order to compensate for that, they need to excavate out material so that there would be a net zero increase in the event of a 100-year flood. There wouldn't be any increase in the flood level. That's why. It's part of the regulations. You can't fill the floodplain to raise the level for somebody else. So if they are putting in fill, they need to create some compensatory storage so that flood elevation doesn't increase in the event of a flood.
Now, do you feel as though that amount of fill that was removed is adequate to displace the water? There was a tremendous amount of fill brought in there. That whole front yard is filled 4 or 5 feet from what it was originally. I've lived here since 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm not a professional engineer, but I'm going to rely on the statement and the certification that we received from the applicant's engineer, what ultimately would have to be reviewed and accepted by the town engineer.
okay, now, and is that supposed to be that elevation out, going away from the house into the wetlands, let's say? Is that supposed to be that same elevation all the way out?
I don't think so, as it's shown on the plan, but again, that's not really the issue before us. They're not asking for any exception to that requirement of the regulations. The only thing they're asking is for the slab of the basement to be at elevation 406.5 versus 410. They are asserting that they comply with the other aspects of the requirement. That's up to the town engineer to review. We're not passing judgment on that aspect of the application.
Okay, all right. And I was talked to DEEP today up in Hartford, and they said one thing that was important was to find out if the flood insurance, is flood insurance compliant,
Right.
and has that been done?
Well, that was my main concern, and according to Mr. Blanchett, the flood insurance has been acquired for the property.
Prior to this, I have become friends with the people who are proposing to buy this house. We've become very friendly. And when I spoke, not been notified about this issue about the floodplain as of Monday. He had to go to Brazil. His mother passed away, so he had to leave for Brazil. But he had, at that point on Monday of this week, had not contacted with these new issues. Because I brought that up. I asked him specifically how much the insurance increased because of this, and he said, I didn't talk to anybody.
You'll have an opportunity. I don't know. I have no response to that. The applicant will have an opportunity to address that.
Okay. And then the other thing is talking about the finished basement. I know they have intent on finishing the basement. They paid extra money to have the deck sealed so that it was waterproof, so that when they're entertaining in the basement, they could stay out underneath the deck. And he's going to have a home office there as well in the basement. So just to answer your question about the finished basement.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You wish to be heard, sir? I have a question, I guess, for, that we answered, that we asked before, I guess, but wouldn't it, it would render the property non-compliant with the FEMA requirements if that were finished space below BFE, would it not?
Not if, I don't have an exact answer for relative to FEMA.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not an expert on FEMA, but my
Right.
understanding from, I didn't have a conversation, but the town engineer did have a conversation with, I don't know if it was FEMA or someone from the state, but someone regarding the FEMA regulations. And the understanding I think that he walked away with is that even under FEMA, you could get an exception. It was really more determinative and based on the local regulation. And our local regulation seems to be stricter than what FEMA says. So in a sense, you're giving them the variance to have the finished floor elevation below, which doesn't talk to whether it's finished or unfinished. Not too smart to finish off something below because
Well,
water gonna go in there, that's what the flood vents are for.
right, in my experience, it would render it non-compliant if it's finished space below base flood elevation. That's why, the slab below BFE, as long as it's unfinished and has the adequate flood venting, is permitted, but in my, and the mechanical equipment is properly elevated, I don't believe it would be FEMA compliant if it's then finished living space.
Well, but I don't know if that's so, because if you even look, whether if our regulations are correct or not, but in our regulations, we talk about, it does require that in residential construction, that including the basement, that's where the variance comes into play,
Right.
elevated to or above base flood elevation. Now, it's interesting, when you get to the non-residential section, I guess the difference is no one's living there, is that it does say substantial, new construction, substantial improvement of any commercial, industrial, other non-residential structure shall either have the lowest floor, including basement, elevated to the level of the base flood elevation, or together with attendant utility and sanitary facility shall be, and then X, Y, Z. Which means obviously you could finish off.
Well, you can flood-proof a commercial building, you can't flood-proof a residential building.
Well, I guess that's the difference, is you're floodproofing it, but then you're capable of resisting the hydrostatic and
Right,
hydrostatic loads. In a sense, that's what, I mean, they're not floodproofing it, but they are dealing with some of those issues.
Okay.
So I don't really have the specific answer for you relative to FEMA. I mean, the other thing you could do is, you could go with that condition as you were looking for, and you could put the caveat, that otherwise could be revisited based on compliance with FEMA or something,
Right.
if there's a path on FEMA.
Fair enough. Mr. Blanchett, did you want to respond to anything that,
As of Monday, I'm not sure who Mike spoke to. He might have spoken to Amanda because Fernando, the future homeowner, left on Saturday morning to Brazil because his mom did pass away. So that is true. But he must have spoke to Amanda, who's his wife, and in regards to the insurance, he's had flood insurance. I don't want to confuse it with standard insurance for most houses that have it. He's had flood insurance for 3 weeks because it was sent over to my attorney. So as far as the insurance, if you need proof of the certificate, we can get it for you. I don't want there to be a misunderstanding that he doesn't know. Something Fernando doesn't know about is if there's a chance that you stipulate something that the basement may not be finished at any time, if you choose to put that in. And again, I'm asking for it not to be put in, but you have final say. That hasn't been discussed yet with Fernando because that's obviously coming about right now. So, and that will be discussed with him obviously before we close the property, if that comes about. If it doesn't, and it stays as is, and he needs to come back in front of Will and Scott in the town to see if he can pull a permit, that's a separate issue. So, but if there's something I need to notify him about after tonight's meeting, he'll know about it. So, that's all.
Right. Thank you. Okay, we'll close the public hearing. All right. I was not at the last meeting, on July 11th, but we do have minutes from that meeting. Let me just see. We've been kind of mixing and matching, numbers here. Who is here? Dominic, Ben,
I was there.
Ryan. So three of you are here. That's satisfactory to vote on the minutes. I will abstain from voting on the minutes as I was not here, but does any, you guys, if you had a chance to review or have questions or?
I move the minutes be approved as
I
presented.
second it.
Okay. Moved by Dominic, seconded by Ben on the minutes. Any questions or issues on the minutes? All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? And I will abstain as I was not present. Now we have deliberation on this particular matter.
Yes, I have a question for Will. Would you, has this area been flooded any time in the past?
I don't have any personal direct knowledge, but I have been anecdotally told that people haven't seen the flood that would be expected from the 100-year flood, but again, that's the misnomer about a 100-year flood. You know, you go, it's not that it happens once in 100 years.
Could happen tomorrow.
It can happen tomorrow, and it can
300.
happen again, and it can happen again the next day. But the point is, there usually is a longer time. We have had a couple 100-year flood events in this area in the last 5 or 10 years. And again, I don't have any personal knowledge of that, but from my understanding, there has been anecdotal evidence that, or statements that area, no one's seen that. But again, you know, in the 50s, there were some really considerable floods in Connecticut, which we haven't seen since. Now, I don't know what year storm they were, but it's a kind of an unknown. The other thing that's unknown too is that those maps are based on studies done at one period of time, and then, you know, new construction throughout the watershed can also change that, positively and negatively. You know, there could be other factors that are draining that wetland faster than normal when they did the flood analysis. And then there's other things that could happen that ends up having more water stay there, so then when it does flood, that much water is already there, which then increases the flood.
We have no records of it ever flooding.
I just don't have any direct knowledge. I'm sure it's flooded. To what extent it's flooded, I'm not sure.
And there was no building there prior to, so.
Yeah.
It must be.
You know,
I don't see any problem with this application as presented. I also, in view of what I heard from Will, regarding the condition, I'm not so inclined to put a condition, since if they have to do something with that basement, they're gonna have to go in front of FEMA, and they have to go in front of the local engineer.
well, they don't go in front of FEMA.
But they're gonna go in front of your
The
department.
point I was making is, I don't know the regulations FEMA is to answer that question qualified enough. My caveat was, if you were to add that condition, you could leave the door open for that to be revisited.
So that condition
So it is
means
an
they're
absolute.
excluded, or that condition means that they can come back in your office and still get some kind of,
Well, I think Jim's question, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, was that if it was to be finished, then that wouldn't be compliant under the FEMA regulations, which they couldn't do. But if there's a provision in FEMA that allows them to do it, that would allow them to be revisited and potentially have a pathway to finish it.
and meet our condition.
And meet the condition. But it's kind of a safeguard to not knowing whether FEMA allows it or just doesn't allow.
But nonetheless, even if FEMA did not allow, they would still have to come back and get a building permit or whatever to do whatever.
Well, they need to do
have
that whether in the floodplain or not.
Right, so there's still a safeguard right there, that you have a check.
That's only gonna be for the building permit aspect, and they may have to get a floodplain permit, yes, so we have to look at that issue and how does it affect the floodplain. I'm not sure what you would do when someone does that though, but, I mean, it's not very smart to finish off something in the floodplain, I think we all know that.
Yeah,
Right.
it's also not insured, correct?
Yeah, it's not sure,
This is in a flood, so anything they put down there.
yeah. And that could also do other, you know, what damage does that do to the rest of the house if you do
Yeah.
that too, so.
Or, yeah, maybe.
Water's your friend, but it's also your enemy.
I don't have a problem with the concept of what they've done. It's a walk-on basement. They've got the proper flood venting that's required, the compensatory storage I don't argue with. I'll rely on the town engineer to review that. My main concern was that any prospective buyer, once you have an elevation that's below the requirement, you pay a ridiculously higher amount for flood insurance. That may get triggered if someone finishes this basement, so I was concerned that the buyer is aware. I accept the representation that flood insurance has been achieved, but that's based on an unfinished basement. You know, I think, I'm concerned, I'm inclined to approve it, but I'm concerned about that basement being finished in the future. But if it's insurable and FEMA compliant, so be it.
Yeah, I mean, it's this property owned by this gentleman. I understand the thinking of like, where is it gonna go next and what's
Right.
gonna happen, but especially after some of the last things we've seen here where it was like property changes hands and stuff that kind of falls through.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a way to say that the basement remain unfinished unless it can be demonstrated to the, you know, town staff that it's insurable and doesn't run afoul of FEMA regs, then fine. I just don't want anybody to be,
But in this condition, the prospective owner, the prospective buyer, I'm talking about, is aware of everything. His attorney is reviewing the insurance plus all this documentation, as I hear.
Yeah, the only thing you wouldn't be aware of at the moment was, was that if we did have some stipulation that the basement could not later be finished, because they said he might wanna do that might be in his plans, but right now, all he knows is it's going to be approved. He doesn't know that there might be the,
You
can't
wanna
finish.
put stuff like this in your approval, because the approval will be recorded, and anyone, because it's not really about the buyer that's in hand, obviously that's important,
yeah, could be
but
anybody.
it's for future reference for anybody. And actually, if you look at the last page of my memo, the zoning regulations actually require you to give notice, and the best way to do that is within your approval document, so.
yeah, it has to be recorded, right?
Yeah.
So again, in my opinion, based on, I mean, I deal with FEMA regs all the time. My opinion would be that it's not FEMA compliant if that basement level is finished. If someone looks at that and comes to a different conclusion and satisfies the town that it's still compliant, I have no objection to that
So
happening.
then,
But I would suggest that there should be the basement remain unfinished unless the town's satisfied that it's it's in FEMA compliance.
and then how do we word that? Would that be the town? Is it just the town, or is it a specific department? Like, how do we decide who it comes back against, or in front
Well,
of?
they would need a flood permit, so.
It would be a staff
So that
review. If the
staff
staff determines that it doesn't run afoul of FEMA requirements, then they can issue the permit. If that's gonna need some additional exception, they'd have to make a new application for finishing of the basement.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would add only, not only be FEMA compliant, but FEMA and town members.
Right.
So there's your motion?
Well, I didn't make a motion. I would just suggest that as a condition, if there be a motion. And also, would it be a condition of the CO, Will, that we wouldn't need to go, that they would have to update that elevation certificate, so that doesn't need to be made
Well, I would put that in, because that should be on your record, because we're gonna have to finalize the plan for the
Okay.
file, so we don't want the other certificate on that file plan.
Right, so we would need a new elevation
I'm
certificate.
still a little bit confused, okay? If we go ahead and put this condition on, and it comes, it all depends how we word the condition too, right? If the prospective buyer comes in and says, there's a condition here, but is there something that I could do to satisfy the town, the engineer and FEMA, and I wanna put this limited, finishing on this basement? Is that,
I would just spin it, instead of him asking us, he would come and tell us that this is what I wanna do, and this is why it's compliant with FEMA and why it's compliant with your regulations.
you don't automatically say, no, because of the condition, I can't give it to you?
Well, no, the condition is giving the out, if he can show that it's compliant,
Okay,
then it is, that's what I said, there's a pathway, a potential pathway
okay.
to achieve something.
But is it, Is it really up to us to figure out what could eventually happen to the basement? Is that
Well-
really our,
They're asking for an exception to allow that basement floor to be at an elevation that's below the flood elevation.
right?
As an unfinished condition, I'm comfortable with it. They're showing those flood openings, or if, in the event of a flood, those are gonna pop open, the basement's gonna fill with water. That's part of their compensatory storage.
Right.
You know, they stated they'd have to remove more fill from the property if those vents were, you know, if we made them fill. The alternative is they fill the floor up 3.5 feet, so it's above base flood elevation. So it's, that basement's gonna get wet in the event of a flood unless they block the flood openings. It's designed to allow water in to relieve the pressure from the wall so the foundation doesn't collapse. So it's designed to flood, hence the concern for it being finished space.
Well, and the other thing too is that if you look at the criteria that you're supposed to judge this on, which is on my page 2, you know, some of that is danger to life and property due to flooding and erosion, you know, susceptibility to porosity, its contents and flood damage. You know, you're supposed to be mindful of not creating problems for future homeowners by letting them do things that maybe they shouldn't do. Because you're making a decision to allow it to be there, so you have some responsibility in making that decision.
And even though, yeah, the importance of the services provided with the proposed facility to the community, then, I mean, that's technically, the next buyer is gonna be part of the community, so you can look at it that way. That's just,
Yeah, I mean, they're doing the right things. They've elevated the furnace above, they provided the openings. All those things reduce the risk for flood damage. So in the event of a flood, there'll be less damage than there otherwise
Yeah.
would have been.
yeah, as of right now on paper, it looks great. I mean,
Right, and it's,
just-
you know, it's not that they can't use the space down there. They can, you know, space to enjoy, but you put finishings in there and you heat it, the temptation is to, you know, block up those flood vents,
Yeah.
because it's, you know, if it's gonna be tempered
point.
space,
Yeah, that's a good
then
point.
it's no longer gonna be compliant. So again, if they can satisfy the town that that doesn't run afoul of the regs, so be it. I'm not confident they'll be able to do that, but if they can,
And that's also
I'm not
not
gonna stand in
a,
their way, but otherwise, that slab should have been 3.5 feet
Higher.
higher. But I think they're doing the right thing by addressing what they've addressed. But I'm just concerned about, you know, what finishing that might trigger to this buyer or any future buyer, that they may end up now getting re-rated on that flood insurance if it's finished space versus unfinished space. So I just want them, you know, to understand that. And if we're giving them an exception,
yeah,
then I think that's a reasonable condition in my view. It doesn't say, you know, again, if they can satisfy the town that they're okay, so be it. It's a lot of discussion for no motion being on the table.
Yeah,
which is-
I mean,
but,
I'd make a motion to approve with the stipulation that as long as any further renovation of the basement apply to FEMA and town regulations.
And are you also including the new elevation
Yeah,
certificate
we
you
should also
provided?
require.
Yes.
An updated
Yes.
And
to do it,
notice,
yeah.
notice compensatory about the insurance, which is in the, required in the code.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so there's a motion to approve with conditions. Is there a second to that motion?
Second?
Any discussion on the motion? Kind of discussed it before the motion, but any other further discussion on the motion? Understanding that a single no vote means a denial on the second.
Yeah, and I think with the stipulations, we're not telling them, no, you cannot go ahead and do renovations. It's just giving them a little more, hey, you have to come back to the town and discuss it, just to make sure it's safe. And, you know, they can still go forward. It's not saying, oh, no, this is it, the basement can't be finished. It kind of,
Check. There's a path.
it gives them a potential for growth. So I think it's the right way to go. I know you were a little confused on it, so I don't know if that answered it.
You answered it.
I tried.
You good?
Good.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Is approved unanimously with conditions. I don't see anything else on the agenda. The file from last month has been continued to September for them to work out things. Maybe not any news on that front, or?
We did have a meeting, and
Is there any possibility that that might be able to be resolved without having us to act on that application?
We were heading down after a while, a path that maybe there was, and it was left that the two attorneys were gonna do something and then get to me. And that was supposed to happen in short order, because I believe Taggart, the applicant's attorney, was gone for August, and
Right.
it's tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I haven't heard, I actually forgot about it, because we met like 2 days after.
Right. So it's on them. They
Well,
need-
she
they
said
need
that's
to-
why she wanted it too.
Yeah.
So I'll have to
On
follow
vacation.
up with our attorney and see what's up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't wanna,
We sort of like given the approval so long that the attorneys would approve, our attorney would
Well,
give
if we
consent.
can find a path that doesn't require the appeal to go forward, we will do that, but, I mean, that takes.
So far, they haven't done anything.
Well, we met, as I said, we met, we had a lot of discussion, and in the end of that discussion, we didn't have an agreement, but we had a thought of a path, and then they were supposed to do something, and now you're reminding me that.
Okay.
I-
I don't wanna talk necessarily
Right.
outside the record, but, it seemed to me that there wasn't an action for them to appeal. You know, they're basically
Well, that's a
appealing
different-
an
that's a
inaction, you know, it's just like.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that too, but in the end, you will probably have to make that determination first,
Yeah,
if it comes back.
you know, unless they can't, you know, the parties, you and them can agree on the definitions that they want, so they can move forward or not. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough.
I mean, in the end, it might be, you have to make whatever decision you do, and if it doesn't go anywhere there, we still might have to make that same thing anyway, so.
Right, okay.
Very good.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here tonight.